SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this midweek edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight, chaos in Nelson Mandela Bay as political parties vote out Mayor Eugene Johnson and are now deciding who to replace her with. We'll take you there live. Suspended public protector Mkhwebane ups the ante. She wants the chairperson of the committee probing her fitness to hold office to recuse himself. What could this mean for the inquiry? Safeguarding electoral democracy in an age of growing mistrust. The task now facing the Independent Electoral Commission. IEC Commissioner and former Chief Electoral Officer Mosotho Moepya is my guest for that one. Straight from a day-long conversation where he and his colleagues were grappling with this very matter.
A critical ingredient I believe we need to resolve those problems is a good leadership in government and generally in society.
Former President Thabo Mbeki reflects on leadership and the energy crisis on the day of the 14th anniversary of his recall from government. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now.
Is 58. All those in favor of the removal of the executive mayor, 62.
From the Nelson Mandela Bay City Council meeting that a few hours ago saw ANC Councillor Eugene Johnson ousted by a Democratic Party-led group of political parties. 62 councillors voted the mayor out against 58 that wanted her to stay. Result stalling the proceedings. The meeting apparently resumed about 15 minutes ago or so, and this time around to elect a new mayor. We hope to take you there as soon as we are able to. But in the meantime, we're going to move to this other story that actually grabbed headlines today. The Section 194 inquiry looking into Public Protector Mkhwebane's fitness to hold office resumed today after a week-long break, but only to hit another snag. Mkhwebane wants committee chairperson Richard Dyantyi to recuse himself. She also wants DAMP Kevin Milham to removed from the committee. Mkhwebane's legal representative, Advocate Dyantyi, says the two are biased. Well, to help us make sense of this development, please welcome Advocate Pitswe Mputle. Good evening, Advocate. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for you.
Overall, just what you made from what we saw and heard today?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's an interesting approach that the Public Protector's legal team have taken. It obviously means that, you know, there is a sort of halt on the proceedings so that this determination into whether or not the chairperson should recuse himself is, you know, takes place and takes full flight. And once that is determined, then the rest of the proceedings can go on.
Well, there are people who say, there they go again, Stalingrad. They're trying to buy time. It's all a facade. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I mean, if you know, everybody has a right to a fair legal process, and if there is a grounds for such an application to be brought, then it should. And ultimately, there's a test for these things, and if there's merit in any allegations that have been made, that will be put forward before the proper processes, and then the relevant outcome in favor or against the recusal itself will be given.
Let's look at a few aspects of it, of course, through the eyes of those who were there and who had some things to say. I want to start first with the recusal of the chairperson. At some point, you had ATM President Vuyelethu Zungula saying that Dyantyi, the chairperson of the committee, should not decide his own recusal application, to which, of course, both Dyantyi, the lawyer to the public protector, and evidence leader Nazreen Bauer said, well, actually, that's not really how these things work. He actually doesn't have to. But of course, I'm asking this because perhaps to, as far as outsiders, those of us who don't really know the law are concerned, they'll be like, actually, he has a point. Why should this guy who is being asked to recuse himself preside over, the same matter?
Yeah, well, I think the starting point should be to look at what a recusal is, right? So a recusal is basically a judge excusing himself, or a judicial officer excusing himself from a matter. Now we then need to go to the question. There are two types of recusals. There's a voluntary one where a matter comes before a presiding officer and they say, well, I'm conflicted, it's a family member, or it's, I have a vested interest in the matter, and so I voluntarily recuse myself from the matter. The other type is where it's brought on application by a litigant or somebody who has an interest in the matter. And in practical terms and in the real world, a recusal application is actually brought before the presiding officer whom you seek to remove. So
nothing unusual or untoward about that.
Absolutely nothing.
It's something that happens regularly. Mr. Zungula then also expressed concern about several MPs not being available. He looked around the room and felt that in the main there were MPs from the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, and we know where both of them stand on this matter, to which, of course, other MPs retorted, no, what's important is the quorum, not who comes from what political party.
Yes, well, I mean, in that regard, there was also an allegation made about the political affiliation as one of the grounds for the recusal itself. So as long as per the rules of the Section 194 committee, there is a proper quorum and there are grounds for the matter for the recusal to be put forward, then there's, it should proceed in those circumstances.
Now, Advocate Mpofu says Mr. Dyantyi is biased, and he points to a few things. One, the fact that, because we'll recall that Advocate Mkwebane wanted President Cyril Ramaphosa to come and testify around the CR17 funds and the Busasa case, and that was turned down. Is making that one of the reasons why he thinks he should recuse himself. He also says that Mr. Dyantyi has shown bias in that he was, harassment is not the word that he used, but basically that he was lenient when it came to the case of the evidence leader, whereas he was not as lenient, and as kind when it came to the public protector's lawyer, which is himself, Advocate Mpofu.
Well, the starting point when dealing with recusals is that there is a presumption of impartiality in favor of judicial officers. This is informed primarily by Section 34 of the Constitution, and this is intertwined with the right to a fair trial. So at the starting blocks, when one raises, a recusal application, before we even get to the merits of that application, the starting point is that we presume generally that judicial officers are impartial. And so, and added to that is this element that that impartiality assumption is not easily dissuaded or deviated from. And this is in several cases, including Bason, Sarfu, as well as the Sakau case. Now, when you get to the test for recusal, that test is, in terms of the, how it's phrased in law, is whether the litigant before court has a reasonable apprehension of bias. And you know, that involves a factual exercise wherein the court or whoever that application is brought before, the question must be asked if, given all the facts of this case, if it were given to another reasonable litigant, would this apprehension still exist? So, you know, some of the grounds which are relied on, and not specifically in this case, but, you know, you can imagine an instance where, because we are both black African males, that there's a presumption that you will rule in my favor. And so the test for a reasonable apprehension of bias is quite high. And simply because there's a mere connection between a judicial officer and the subject matter or the litigant does not in and of itself infer a reasonable apprehension of bias by the person bringing the recusal application. Well,
in the words of Advocate Mpofu, there have been, and I quote, innumerable examples of conduct on the part of the chairperson which exhibit undue bias and favoritism in his dealings with the evidence leaders. He goes on to say that he has seen, quote, unidirectional hostility and negative remarks, quote, unquote, directed only at Mkhwebane's legal team. Those are some of the things he said today to then justify or to make a case for to make a case for Mr. Dyantyi's recusal. Then he went further to say Mr. Dyantyi gave interviews last week, you'll recall, on the back of that "your day will come" comment that Advocate Mpofu made, which then Mr. Dyantyi and the rest of the ANC felt was a threat that Mr. Advocate Mpofu was making towards the chairperson. And of course, I mean, Advocate Mpofu says then the comments or the things that Mr. Dyantyi said during those interviews on the back of that comment, which he doesn't think was a threat, you know, proved once again Mr. Dyantyi that is bias.
Well, I mean, the starting point must also then be to recognize that judicial officers, whether it be a judge or somebody presiding in the position of Mr. Dyantyi, is not completely devoid of all human emotion when they are occupying that specific role. And so somebody's political affiliation or beliefs, you cannot, you know, separate yourself from that. But the grounds for those existing, as I said earlier, do not in and of themselves lead to the conclusion of a reasonable apprehension of bias. There needs to be something else. There needs to be something which goes beyond the extension, which, when properly construed, when we ask the question, can the judicial officer occupying this role apply himself to the facts and circumstances of the matter before him impartially without fear or favor? If the question to that answer is no, then obviously the reason apprehension of bias exists, and you know, the application for recusal must succeed in those circumstances. And that's the hurdle essentially that will have to be overcome with the facts before the public protector and her legal team.
Well, the other person that Advocate Mkwebane via Advocate Mpofu wants removed is the DAMP Kevin Mileham. Now, he is the husband to Natasha Matsoni, who is the former chief whip of the Democratic Alliance, and she's the one who brought the impeachment motion to the House on behalf of the official opposition. Advocate Mpofu says he too has shown bias through tweets and a whole lot of other things, and must be removed from the committee too.
Well, I mean, Look, there are several other grounds on which somebody may be removed or is eligible for being removed. Bias in and of itself is quite a high standard, because, as I mentioned earlier, you'll recall that there exists, before we even go into the inquiry, a presumption of impartiality in favor of the judicial officer. So it may well be that there is other conduct which you know, the people are guilty of, but that doesn't in and of itself, the marriage in and of itself does not conclude or does not create the connection or lead to the ultimate finding of bias. The test must be gone through. The questions must be answered in the affirmative, as stated when dealing with recusal applications. And if they are found to be answered affirmatively, then, you know, the bias or the reasonable apprehension thereof exists, and the recusal must then succeed.
Well, Mr. Mpofu doesn't spare the evidence leaders, you know, either. He accuses them of colluding with Mr. Dyantyi.
Yes. In that regard, it then creates, you know, a bit of a quagmire of who, you know, who's who in the zoo. Are we going after everybody in totality? Are we going after the evidence leaders as well? Because then they have to be roped in, and then the recusal, you know, must go to them as well. And you know, then you get into murky waters of how do you then, is a recusal a proper mechanism for removing an evidence leader? You know, and it just becomes something that's a bit murky. But as far as, you know, the allegations are concerned, they have to be tested before the proper forum, and the outcome that's relevant must be found in that regard. One
wonders where all of this is going to go, because I mean, if you listen to throughout, you know, the duration of this inquiry, I mean, I'm looking at some of the words that members of this committee have used, you know, in reference to Advocate Mpofu: insulting, abrasive, disrespectful, rude, you know. And the other, Jane Mananiso, asked Advocate Mpofu to, quote unquote, apply emotional intelligence. One wonders whether this bodes well for, you know, this inquiry, and what, you know, this sort of attitudes and accusations and counter accusations will amount to.
Well, I mean, at all times it must be important to, as it were, play the ball and not the man, right? Because that's ultimately what is before. There's the public protector is well within her rights. If she's of the opinion that, you know, a recusal is warranted, she's well within her rights to raise that. And even in adjudicating that, the conduct of the legal practitioner must be set aside, and the recusal application must be looked at on its merits and judged solely on that. It cannot be that external factors, no matter what they are, infiltrate and dilute and taint the merits or you know, the merits of the recusal application, if there are any.
Now, look, it looks unlikely that Mr. Dyantyi and his party will accede to this request for him to recuse himself. What options will the public protector then have? In other words, what happens?
Well, I mean, there's always the review. You can then go externally and review the decision in the courts, and pending that, you know, if there's any further steps that you wish to take it to, an appeal or anything of that nature, that's always open to them. But they would have to show again the test in its fullest. It would have to be applied, and once it's taken out of the realm of the committee itself into, you know, a court setting, then, you know, the ball game changes slightly in respect of, you know, what can be done there in that regard. But we'll wait to see, I suppose, what the inevitable outcome is, and we'll just play it by ear and see what happens from there, I suppose.
But potentially things could drag on for much longer than perhaps would have been the case if this particular request.
Yes, unfortunately that is a reality that exists. It's obviously in everybody's interest that the matter reach finality, quickly. It is a provision and a right in the Constitution that matters be finalized as efficiently and as effectively as possible. However, where a litigant feels aggrieved by a party, the appeal and review process exists to remedy such defects for a litigant. They
are within their rights, whatever other people may think of the intention behind it all.
Indeed so.
Let me thank you for your time. Advocate Bitswe Mbotle, trying to help us make sense of this development. Suspended public protector Mkhwebane today formally making the application. She wants chairperson of the committee, Richard Dyantyi, to recuse himself. She also wants DAMP Kevin Malhem removed from that committee. We will see, of course, what comes out of this. I understand that the committee will be looking into this issue this coming Friday, and that's the day after tomorrow. After the break, we talk to the IEC. They have just had a full-day seminar today, where they are looking at all matters elections. Some worrying trends there, where there's a great deal of apathy, but also voters aren't so keen to go to the polls due to their experiences on the ground. We are going to speak to the former chief electoral officer, who is currently a commissioner with the IEC. Our topic or theme is safeguarding electoral democracy in an age of growing mistrust. And that's the task currently facing the IEC. That coming up in a moment. Don't go away. Safeguarding electoral democracy in an age of growing mistrust. That's the task now facing the Independent Electoral Commission. The Commission had a seminar today where they met and discussed this very important matter based on various on research that was done by various organizations over the last while, and they came up with some rather troubling findings. Take a look at this insert prepared for us by Natasha Piri.
A worrisome trend amongst the South African electorate. Electoral interest is dwindling, and not at a national level but globally. The Human Rights Science Research Council predicts that a voter turnout in future elections will drop due to a voter apathy.
That covers 2005 to 2021. The dominant recurring message is that political disinterest is consistently the main reason for not intending to vote looking across elections over the past 15 odd years. Fluctuates between around 65% up to about 75, and in 2018 it went as high as 78%. So this disillusionment and disinterest is really crucial.
In last year's local government elections, the number of young people aged between 18 and 19 years registered the lowest number of votes. One research finding notes that the levels of participation are on a downward trajectory.
Our summary there is that levels of partisanship are generally on a downward trajectory, so people are becoming less partisan, and are the lowest amongst the youngest and most educated cohorts.
There are calls for other stakeholders, including other political parties, to also encourage their youth to go out in their numbers to vote.
I think, yes, the Commission on the budget it has, if you look at its annual reports, etc., it does there's a huge number of civic and democracy education events happening on a year-to-year basis around the country. To lay it at the doorstep of the Commission and say you've got to inspire the youth to come to the ballot box, where are the other political actors? What about the parties, and what about the officials that have been elected and their conduct? So I think it's really, it goes back to a mandate issue. The youngsters are struggling with partisanship because they're struggling to think which party can they identify with that would best represent their needs.
The The research findings will be shared among stakeholders in the elections sector and are meant to improve the efficacy of managing the country's voting processes by the IEC ahead of the 2024 elections. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Natasha Piri, who of course attended that seminar, and joining me straight from that seminar is IEC Commissioner and former Chief Electoral Officer, and that's Mr. Mosotho Moepya. Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for your time. Why should political disinterest, which your researchers, have put before you today, matter? Why is that something to be concerned about?
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. Political disinterest, it's actually at the heart of a democratic process. If voters are motivated to vote, democracy thrives. But if they are not, democracy suffers.
To someone who says, oh, well, those who are keen to go and vote will go and vote. Those who don't want to go and vote will just stay at home. What's wrong with that?
Well, there are two sides to that coin. One is that in this country, unlike in Australia, if you stay home, you have not broken any law. In fact, people will argue that you have exercised your democratic right to either participate or not participate. But in a democracy, we as citizens have a duty to elect representatives that will serve our needs. People are staying away because increasingly this research indicates to us that they are beginning to believe that their interests are not served by their participation, and that must be troubling to all of us.
But then it is the people we vote for that are responsible for this situation. I mean, people can't be blamed for losing faith in the political system because it keeps on giving us, the things that we detest, things we don't like, things we don't appreciate, and things we don't deserve, frankly.
Well, for the first time, to my knowledge, we're beginning to understand why that is so. In this country, and we can only talk about our democracy, but democracies across the world are experiencing some form of headwinds. In our case, there is an interesting phenomenon that our researchers unpack today, that when South African voters are disillusioned with their choice of political party, many of them do one of two things. They either give that party another chance. In other words, they say, well, I'm going to pardon you for now and hope that this time you will do something. Others, just instead of saying, I'm going to give another party an opportunity, they simply stay at home. Researchers are calling that disillusionment, or they are exiting the voting process. And that is a concern we must have and we must address.
Less partisan. Young people especially,
yes,
are becoming less partisan, according to the researchers. Good or bad thing?
Good and bad. Let me tell you what is interesting. Many of the young people today, or people that are eligible to vote now, for the first time, are people who have not lived in the 1994 era, for example, or before the 1994 era. Their experience of, our country is very different from you and I. And so it's good in that sense that they need to make objective decisions. But it is difficult when they make those objective decisions in a manner that doesn't help deal with the challenges our electoral democracy faces. And I think there is a duty, therefore, on our part, all of us as society, to correct what they think is broken.
Then it places this responsibility on the part of the commission to then deal with something that you are not responsible for.
You know, I like that question because that is the elephant in the room. The commission cannot be left with that responsibility alone. I'm not saying that the commission shouldn't have a role to play in it, but essentially the research is indicating that the issue is not about the services we provide. Of course, we're not getting 100% for everything that we do. If you get 97% of voters saying they're satisfied, you have to address the 3%. That's where we are in many instances. But the truth of the matter is that they are saying, my options are not options I really like. They're not appealing. And that is the matter we need to deal with. I'm saying that we need, all of us, as electoral stakeholders, as the media, as political parties, we need to offer an alternative for young persons, the disillusioned voters, to find reason to begin to believe again. That's how we will turn the tide.
But you've seen, you've seen what then tends to happen. When politicians find themselves with their backs against the wall, they start looking for places and people to blame. Yeah? You saw in the last election, we were dealing with that, as results began, trickling in, and people were not believing what they were seeing on that big board. They started trying to find fault with how the IEC is running the election, in the same way that some of them started finding fault with how the SABC was either decampaigning them or not giving them sufficient airtime. So we now get to be at the receiving end of something that was caused by the political system itself, outside of your IECs and your SABCs.
That is why we needed to get to this point today, so that we don't scapegoat, we deal with the real issue. The real issue isn't that. The real issue is that voters believe that their vote is not in truth and in fact translating into the promises that they've been given. And I'm not saying that fundamentally that it is so or not so. But at the time when you and I are on the receiving side, that is the part of the truth we didn't know for sure. We now know the truth for sure. And we should be able to say to everyone that we're not persons that are perfect, or institutions that are perfect. But there are issues we need to address. And these are real issues. Unless we deal with them, we're not addressing the issue, we're just finding reasons why it can't be our fault. I must say that this is not a situation that is unique to South Africa. Democracies across the world are being tested at the moment. In fact, Afrobarometer is saying that institutions like your institution, my institution, are impacted by what is called the pull-down effect. Essentially, political establishments are receiving reviews that are less positive. In other words, very negative. And because that's really where we work, sometimes people can't separate this institution from the other. And all of that affects us negatively. And for that reason, for us as the Electoral Commission, for example, we need to assert our independence, we need to communicate more, we need to be a lot more transparent in the way that we address issues. And we need to educate a lot more. But because persons who are disaffected are really saying, you know what, this is enough, I don't want to get involved anymore, they seem to say all of you are the same. But we are not. We are not a political party. We don't offer choice. We are a referee. You know, we get bitten with the players that are not playing properly. They're saying the referee and everyone, you didn't give us a good game. And that's essentially where we are.
But how have other jurisdictions that have managed to handle this situation? Because your researchers say this is a worldwide phenomenon. We're not unique in this. How have others who have done better than others sort of done? What have they done, and how to deal with this?
Well, jurisdictions differ. There are countries where you don't quite get to see this because, for example, and I go back to the example of Australia, every citizen by law must vote in an election. If they don't, they get fined. So, you know, you won't see that there are still people who don't vote in Australia that rather pay a penalty than go and vote. Or others will go and intentionally spoil the ballot rather than, you know, express a choice. But we think that, you know, when you begin to know what the problems are, let's address the problem. And I think the timing of this research output is brilliant. We don't have an election that has been called. One is going to be heard in 18 months and even more. We do have time to begin to deal with this. Those of us that have a part to play in correcting it must, as part of the preparation for the elections, we must begin to deal with this phenomenon. We have great opportunities. There's an electoral amendment bill that's on the table. There are issues that bill is raising. There are issues that this research is raising. And I imagine people who are disaffected will begin to see whether this is not an opportunity for some of their concerns to be dealt with and express a view one way or the other to say, you're beginning to deal with my issues or you're still not dealing with my issues. For our part, before we conduct an election, we do commission a survey that says how are voters intending to participate, or what are the issues that they're facing. We will still do it, and we'll do it in advance, as we have always done, and that will help us to deal with the issues that they're still expressing beyond the point where we are right now.
What then? I mean, what though do you tell your stakeholders? And I'm talking specifically here about political parties, because you would have thought that because what we're experiencing, which all these research companies, you know, the three of them that you had today highlighted, you know, very well, are things that we know, are things that people have spoken about before. And you would think that given that, I mean, we started the show with what is happening in Nelson Mandela Bay, you know, that situation, I mean, since elections, there's never been a stable municipality there. They keep doing what they were doing again today, remove this one, bring in another one. Then few weeks, months later, the other faction, a group comes out stronger, they elect theirs. But at the end of the day, and by their own admission, nothing is happening where it matters. The 1.2 million or so South Africans that live in that part of our country have not experienced proper service delivery since elections, you know. But so you would have thought that as like politicians would appreciate that, you know, and begin to address the things. But lo and behold, that's not what is happening. Instead, the situation is getting worse instead of getting better. So what are you going to say to them when you meet with them on the back of this body of or yet another body of evidence, I should say?
I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, and I must say, we as an institution, the Electoral Commission, have never before gone to this kind of length to really pinpoint the challenge. We've shouldered accusations and kind of, you know, provided technical data that said, but, you know, 97% of our voters are satisfied with the service we give them. We haven't gone to say, but these are the real issues. If you look, for example, at probably the top 3 topical news issues in the country every day, adverse political developments are one of them. Like you point out, the Nelson Mandela thing. And what happens then is that every one of us that deal with that issue become, you know, some people don't understand. They say, but what's the Electoral Commission sitting and doing and watching all of this not happening? The truth of the matter is, we now get to the point to say political parties, the media, the Electoral Commission, these are the things you're not doing or you should be doing better. And we believe, as the Commission, that this was a very good step towards that. There are democracies in the world that have seen this trend and never, you know, undertook anything to correct it. We are believing that this is a step we have taken to correct it. To fix it is going to take a while, but unless we start now, we're never going to get there.
Well, without speaking for the SABC, but as a student of broadcasting,
you are a legend.
You know, I know that one of the big issues is an unfunded, you know, public service mandate. This has been the story, you know, of the SABC for decades now. You know, and we can talk about who's supposed to play what role in sorting that out. But there is that reality, and especially now with increased competition than has ever been the case before. But then you're going to get politicians coming to then blame us, among other people, including the IEC, for continuing to go, for things continuing to go the way that they have been going, that which this body of research is speaking to. From the IEC's vantage, what are your challenges still in how you're managing this thing?
2 things are going to come out of the, or two areas are going to be programmatized in the work that we do. We're not just talking to say people get away from us, look at, you know. There are certain things we can do from where we sit. For example, to the extent that issues of governance, you know, impact negatively on elections, we perhaps could look at things like other areas in the Electoral Code of Conduct that we should be looking at. Are there requirements or amendments in law that we should be, you know, considering? And that's part of the correction. I'm not saying it's the whole thing, but there are issues we need to look at even as we prepare for the next set of elections, even in law. The second area is that we now need to engage. You know, civic and voter education are not done just to tick the box. They are done to correct behavior that you begin to see, you know, growing when in fact it shouldn't be. And I imagine that that is going to be part of this. We will need to identify these adverse trends or negative trends that we are seeing and begin to say we need to deal with the people that it affects. One of the greatest observations made today was that people say, young people don't vote. But young people are very diverse. We need to understand that phenomenon and deal with it. So that really is the work we have to do ourselves, those that are partners with us in elections. And I imagine issues of funding and other things also form part of that. If you say, you know, unfunded mandate and things, to do the work we need to do, we will need to be funded appropriately. I'm not complaining, sitting here and saying the Electoral Commission is not funded appropriately. In fact, in many instances we are. We do work. Of course, we are affected by what's happening in the country and the economic situation. But we're in a very good position to undertake largely the work that we are required to do.
One quick question. I don't want the people who are watching this program to say, this is Dyantyi. There's someone who was just asked a question, I understand. Mkhwebane, why during election they hire SADTU members to be election officials? Is that true?
We don't hire SADTU members. We hire persons that we put through a process that we have predetermined. And let's really deal with this thing. You know, teachers are persons who you and I, like you and I, hold positions. Not every teacher is a SADTU member, but in the work we do, perceptions are more current than reality. There are SADTU teachers, there are non-SADTU teachers. But if you say I had employed 4% of presiding officers as teachers, people say 4% of your staff were SADTU members. That is incorrect, and we must deal with that reality. It's not true. And it's unconstitutional to discriminate on that basis. We have a criteria, fairly well known, fairly well publicized, with remedies for anyone that is aggrieved that can call upon. Yeah.
Let me thank you, sir, for your time.
It's been good speaking to you.
Before you go, let's go to this. Former President Thabo Mbeki states that challenges of the economy, politics, peace and global security, to name a few, can be resolved through good leadership. Mbeki was engaging with students and diplomats at the University of South Africa.
Here we're faced with enormous challenges. Enormous challenges with the economy, enormous challenges with the politics, enormous challenges about matters of peace, security, safety of the population, many challenges of this kind. And a critical ingredient I believe we need to resolve those problems is a good leadership. In government and generally in society.
Mbeki also zoomed in on the energy crisis we are currently facing, questioning why we are not able to address this matter effectively. He raised whether the answer could lay in placing engineers and economists at the leadership of the power utility Eskom.
Why do we seem to be incapable as a country that is incapable of addressing this matter effectively? Is it the issue that Padile Hotla is raising? Let's put engineers and economists as the leadership of Eskom. Maybe that's the answer. But I'm saying it's going to come from the kind of leadership that we need.
Well, Cabinet has issued a statement saying they're dealing with the electricity crisis with all the urgency it deserves, but they will release details a little later on. We'll see what comes out of that. And that's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.